Maya sat with the overdue notice pressed against her palms, as if clutching the paper hard enough might erase the bold red letters screaming that rent was due. Ethan had promised to catch up, working doubles and sometimes triples, but his hours left him worn out and barely present. She told herself she would explain it to Andre, maybe beg for more time, though even the thought made her skin prickle with embarrassment. She had avoided crossing his path all week, timing her steps in and out of the apartment carefully, until the knock came anyway, steady and deliberate, pulling her heart up into her throat. Andre's voice carried through the door, smooth but commanding, asking if she had a minute. She opened reluctantly, keeping her eyes low, murmuring an apology about the delay. He didn't scold, didn't raise his tone, but the weight of his stare made her feel even smaller. He reminded her the deadline had already passed. Rent wasn't something that could just slide forever. She stumbled through explanations, her voice soft, pointing out Ethan's extra shifts, their intent to catch up. Andre tilted his head, studying her, and then with unsettling ease shifted the conversation away from bills and balances. He told her he wasn't blind to her struggle, that he noticed the way she carried everything on her shoulders while her husband was rarely around. Her stomach tightened. She tried to insist she could handle it, but Andre leaned slightly closer, lowering his tone, asking if she wanted another option. The suggestion wasn't spelled out at first, it hung in the air, half-spoken, and she wished she could ignore what he meant. Yet the smirk that followed erased any doubt. Heat flushed her cheeks, anger, shame, and something else she refused to name. She shook her head, blurting that she was married, that she couldn't even entertain the idea. Andre chuckled lightly, brushing off her resistance like it was expected, telling her marriage didn't change the facts. Rent was late, and choices had to be made. Her instinct was to push back, to remind him of decency, but he never raised his voice or pressed harshly. Instead, he let silence work its way between them, staring with quiet certainty, as though he already knew the conflict turning in her chest. He left before she could find better words, offering only a final reminder that time was running short. His parting line lingered, sinking deeper than she wanted it to. Think about it, Maya. Opportunities don't wait. She closed the door quickly, locking it with trembling hands, but the echo of his voice kept her awake long after. Lying in the dim light of the bedroom, she tried to shove the thought aside. Ethan had texted earlier, too tired for a call, promising he'd bring groceries tomorrow. She read the message twice, forcing herself to focus on his sacrifice, his loyalty, his exhaustion. But another part of her mind betrayed her, replaying Andre's steady confidence, the way he noticed her, the way he spoke as though he could see the hollow loneliness she buried. She cursed herself for even letting it register. She was supposed to be better than this. The days that followed dragged heavier. Each creak in the hallway made her tense, half dreading, half expecting to hear his knock again. Every time she glanced at the unpaid notice on the counter, guilt and fear twisted tighter. Ethan's paycheck would come, but late again, and she knew Andre would not stay patient forever. What unsettled her more than the overdue rent was the memory of how her pulse had quickened when Andre leaned closer. She told herself it was only intimidation, the stress of the moment, but when she closed her eyes she felt the thrum of temptation she couldn't fully explain. One evening, carrying laundry back to her unit, she heard his voice down the hall, greeting another tenant. She froze mid-step, debating whether to retreat or continue forward. He caught her anyway, eyes locking with hers briefly before he smiled in that same calm, assured manner. Nothing was said directly, but his gaze reminded her of the unspoken agreement he believed hung between them. She muttered a quick hello, kept her head down, and rushed inside, her heart racing. Alone, she paced the small apartment, whispering to herself that she would never betray Ethan, never cross that line. She repeated it until her throat felt raw, but the conviction rang hollow. Andre had left her with no threats, no demands, just a choice, one she wished had never been offered. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she saw not the overdue notice but the faint curve of his smirk, and it terrified her more than the debt itself. Would you like me to now continue and write section 2 in the same direct faceless script style, 760 words? Maya woke with the same tension that had followed her for days, the overdue notice still taped to the fridge like an accusation. She told herself Ethan would fix it soon, but even when his call finally came, his voice was rushed and tired, just enough energy to say he'd be working late again. She wanted to tell him about Andre, about the gnawing worry, but the words stuck. He promised he was doing it all for them, then hung up quickly, leaving her with silence that felt heavier than the debt itself. Later, Andre appeared again, his knock unhurried, his presence steady. He didn't waste words, didn't ask if she'd thought about his suggestion, he simply looked at her, and the pause between them carried the meaning. Maya stammered something about her husband, but Andre shook his head, cutting her excuse short. "I'm not asking about him," he said quietly, "I'm asking about you." The distinction struck deeper than she wanted to admit. She told him she could wait until Ethan's paycheck, that they'd catch up, but he countered with the blunt truth, waiting didn't pay what was owed. Her chest tightened. She hated that his logic made sense, hated that desperation made her ears listen longer than her pride wanted to. Andre leaned a little closer, his tone softening as though he were offering comfort instead of temptation. He told her he saw more than just someone behind on rent. He saw a woman overlooked, left alone too often, holding everything together by herself. She flinched at his words because they mirrored the thoughts she whispered late at night. For the first time, she didn't snap back or walk away. She just stood there, trembling, letting him say what she didn't want to hear. Inside, she screamed at herself to shut the door, to push him out, but instead she let him stay in her space. He spoke with that same measured calm, offering not a transaction but a trade of attention, a way to lift the weight without money. Maya's lips parted with protest, but no words came. The sound of Ethan's voice echoed in her memory, tired, distracted, promising he'd make it up later. And here was Andre, focused, unhurried, waiting only for her answer. Her pulse raced as though her body had already chosen what her mind still fought. She thought of the long nights alone, the unanswered cravings for closeness, the steady erosion of passion in her marriage. She wanted to believe she was only cornered, only forced by circumstance, but deep inside she recognized the truth. She was curious, pulled toward the danger even as it terrified her. She whispered, "I can't," but her tone wavered, more plea than refusal. Andre read it instantly, closing the space with a quiet certainty that left no room for denial. The moment stretched thin, every sound amplified, the hum of the fridge, the faint thud of her heart, the quiet weight of his breath near her ear. Her body betrayed her resolve, leaning into what she swore she'd resist. She hated the weakness, hated the hunger that surfaced, but when Andre finally crossed the boundary, she didn't move away. The conflict churned inside her, one voice shouting of betrayal, another whispering that she finally felt seen, desired, chosen. When it was over, silence crashed in heavier than before. Maya lay awake long after, staring at the ceiling, Ethan's side of the bed cold and untouched. Her skin still burned with the memory, but her chest tightened with guilt that pressed harder than the overdue rent ever had. She told herself it was survival, that she had no other choice, that it was a one-time mistake. Yet the truth settled deep. She hadn't just paid rent differently, she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Andre's voice replayed in her mind, steady and calm, as if he already knew she would give in. The certainty scared her most, because it meant this wouldn't end as simply as she wanted. She whispered Ethan's name under her breath, clinging to the thought of her husband as if it could erase what had happened, but the guilt lingered. She buried her face in the pillow, repeating the same lie she needed to believe it was just once. Nobody has to know. Do you want me to continue with section 3, 760 words, in the same sharp, faceless script style to complete the story? Morning light crept across the room but did nothing to wash away the heaviness sitting on Maya's chest. Ethan's voice on the phone was warm but distracted, telling her he'd be late again, that he was covering an extra shift so the next paycheck would stretch further. She murmured encouragement, guilt tightening her throat with every word. She wanted to confess, to unload the secret that had already begun to rot her from the inside, but she couldn't. His trust was too solid, his sacrifice too heavy. The silence between his sentences reminded her he had no suspicion, and that ignorance was both a blessing and a curse. Every sound in the building sharpened her paranoia now. A knock at another door, footsteps in the hall, even the buzz of Andre's phone number lighting her screen made her heart race. He hadn't threatened her, hadn't even asked for more. He only sent a short message the next day, "Hope you're okay." The simplicity rattled her more than demands would have. She stared at the text, knowing it meant more, that he wasn't done. She deleted it, but the words were already etched into her memory. Andre didn't press immediately. He was casual when she ran into him in the stairwell, greeting her like any other tenant, but the curve of his smile reminded her of the night she swore she'd forget. Each encounter carried a dangerous weight, not in what he said but in what they both knew. She avoided his eyes, rushed past, yet her body betrayed her, pulsing with the memory she tried to erase. Ethan noticed her distraction, though he misread it. One evening, as he set his work boots by the door, he asked gently if the bills were weighing too heavy. She forced a smile, pressing close to him, pretending her stiffness was exhaustion. He kissed her forehead absent-mindedly, reassuring her they'd be caught up soon, and returned to his paperwork. The distance between them felt wider than the room. She wanted him to look deeper, to see the truth hiding in her trembling hands, but part of her prayed he never would. Days blurred, marked by the secret she carried. At night, she lay beside Ethan, replaying Andre's words, Andre's nearness, the way her body had betrayed everything she swore she valued. When Ethan's arm draped over her waist, her chest clenched, guilt and desire colliding until she could hardly breathe. She shifted away slowly, whispering that she was too tired, and he accepted the excuse without question. That acceptance cut deeper than anger would have. Andre returned one afternoon, his presence filling the narrow hallway. He didn't speak of money this time. He only asked if she'd thought about them, about the moment they'd shared. She shook her head, whispered that it was a mistake, that it couldn't happen again. He studied her, not with hostility but with that same calm certainty, as though her denial meant nothing. "You didn't look like it was a mistake," he said softly, and her knees nearly buckled at the sting of truth. She retreated inside, bolting the lock, her hands shaking. Her reflection in the window stared back, eyes rimmed with shame, lips still trembling with the ghost of words she hadn't said. She wanted to believe it was over, that she could shut him out, bury the night and move forward. But the gnawing dread whispered otherwise. Andre wasn't chasing, he was waiting, patient, confident that the hunger she fought would surface again. Every interaction with Ethan grew heavier. She cooked his meals, laughed at his tired jokes, folded his laundry, all with the weight of a lie pressing down on her spine. She wondered if he could sense it, if the faint tremor in her voice gave her away, but his focus was always on survival, on work, on making ends meet. His trust shielded her from suspicion, and that shield became a blade she felt twisting in her chest. Weeks passed, the overdue notice gone, the rent quietly resolved in ways Ethan never questioned. Andre remained a shadow at the edge of her days, not demanding, not confessing, simply existing with a knowledge they both carried. The silence between them was worse than words. She never knew when his voice might break it again, when temptation might strike in another unguarded moment. Lying awake one night, Ethan asleep beside her, she whispered to the ceiling that it had been one night, just one, and that it didn't define her. But the lie was fragile, cracking under the weight of memory. She knew one truth she could never speak aloud: the rent had been paid, but the cost was far greater than money. What she gave away couldn't be reclaimed, and what she carried now was a secret that would follow her long after the debt was gone. She closed her eyes, clutching Ethan's hand in the dark, her lips shaping silent words she couldn't bring herself to say. One night, one choice, one truth, and nothing in her marriage, her home, or her heart would ever be the same again. Do you want me to now combine all three finished sections into a single seamless 2,000-word script so it reads like one continuous faceless story without breaks?